Welcome to the deep dive. We're diving straight into the philosophical texts you've sent our way today.
Yeah, and our mission, so to speak, is to really explore these deep connections between knowledge and power that come up again and again in these sources.
Exactly. We're looking at things like control, censorship, how knowledge gets valued or sometimes dismissed.
And touching on some fundamental ideas, really, about our right to access culture, information, that kind of thing. We'll also look at different ways of knowing, beyond the sort of typical Western view.
And technology, of course. Does it level the playing field for knowledge,
Right.
or does it create new divides?
That double-edged sword idea.
Right. So let's frame this with some core questions from these texts. Who basically gets to decide what knowledge is important and why?
And how do power structures, maybe governments, maybe social pressures, shape what we actually get to learn?
In our digital age, is tech helping close that global knowledge gap, or is it maybe making it wider in some ways?
And why are some ways of knowing, maybe traditions or introspective practices, often pushed aside?
Yeah, why are they sometimes seen as less valid? We've got a really fascinating mix of thinkers here, different times, different cultures. So let's jump in.
Okay, let's start with that big one. Knowledge and power. Nietzsche, on the genealogy of morals, he offers a really provocative perspective here.
Provocative is a good word for Nietzsche, yeah.
He argues that our ideas of good and bad, they weren't actually defined by the people considered good in some objective sense.
Okay, wait. So not based on usefulness or kindness, but
Defined by those who held power. The nobles, the rulers.
yeah.
He talks about this pathos of distance, this feeling of superiority.
Ah, right. So because they were on top, they just decided their traits were the good ones. Like they set the standard just by being powerful.
Pretty much. It's about creating values, naming them. And it wasn't necessarily about utility for everyone else. It established their difference, their dominance.
And this power, it extends even to language itself.
Yes. Nietzsche suggests rulers basically name things. The act of naming is an act of claiming ownership, of defining reality. Think about how loaded some terms can become.
That really makes you question where our basic values come from. But he doesn't just talk about the powerful, does he? What about the response from those without power, this slave morality?
Exactly. That's the other side of the coin.
Okay.
Nietzsche argues that the oppressed, the slaves, in his terms, they develop their own morality in reaction against the powerful.
So they flip it. What the powerful call good strength, maybe pride the oppressed might see as evil.
Right. And instead, they value things like compassion, humility, patience, qualities that perhaps help them endure their situation or offer a different kind of strength.
Okay, I see the contrast.
And we can sort of connect this dynamic, maybe cautiously, to someone like Frantz Fanon. In Black Skin, White Masks, he's looking at colonialism.
A very different context, but similar power dynamics.
Similar dynamics of imposed values, yeah. Fanon analyzes how colonized people grapple with the culture and values forced on them by the colonizers. There's this struggle for recognition, for their own worth to be acknowledged.
Which sounds like a fundamental human rights claim, doesn't it? The right to be seen, to have your perspective valued equally.
Absolutely. It's about asserting your humanity against a system that denies it. And this whole power knowledge thing isn't just ancient history or colonial history, is it?
No, definitely not. We still see states managing information, sometimes censoring things.
For sure. John Stuart Mill, writing way back in the 19th century in On Liberty, was already warning about this. He argued passionately for allowing even unpopular opinions.
Because challenging ideas helps us get closer to the truth or understand our own beliefs better.
Precisely. Even a wrong opinion forces us to defend the right one, to understand why it's right. But then you have thinkers like Charles Taylor, more recently, talking about a subtler kind of control.
Oh yeah, you mentioned him. The ethics of authenticity. He talks about soft despotism. What's that about? It sounds slightly ominous.
It is a bit unsettling. Taylor's idea is that we might not face overt tyranny, but we could slowly lose meaningful political control.
Wow.
Through, well, increasing individualism, maybe the breakdown of local communities, and the rise of huge, distant bureaucratic states. We feel less connected, less able to participate effectively.
So we kind of withdraw. We focus on our private lives and leave the big decisions to the experts or the state.
That's the danger Taylor points to. We become isolated atoms, rather than engaged citizens collectively shaping our future through shared knowledge and action. It's a loss of what Tocqueville called political liberty.
Wow. That's a really sobering thought, losing control not by force, but by a kind of gradual fading away of engagement, which leads us nicely into more direct forms of control. Self-censorship.
Right. And it's fascinating to see how far back this idea goes. Plato in the Republic was already thinking about what stories should be allowed in his ideal city.
He wanted to censor stories, even foundational myths.
He did. Particularly stories about the gods or heroes behaving badly, immorally, or cowardly. He worried these would corrupt the young, give them bad models to follow.
So right from the start of Western philosophy, there's this tension. The need for free inquiry versus the perceived need to protect society, especially the young, from harmful ideas.
Exactly. Who gets to decide what's harmful and based on what criteria? That's the perennial question.
And Mill, centuries later, he was less worried about the state, maybe, and more about society itself acting as a censor.
Yes, the tyranny of the majority, or the tyranny of prevailing opinion. He saw how social pressure, the fear of disapproval, can make people hide their true beliefs or eccentricities.
Sort of like self-censorship. You don't say what you really think because you don't want to be ostracized or attacked.
Precisely. You conform, you suppress your own ideas to fit in with what seems acceptable. Mill thought this stifled individuality and progress. You could at least see parallels today, maybe with online culture.
Oh, absolutely. The fear of saying the wrong thing. And Fanon adds another layer here, specifically about colonial power, right?
A really crucial layer. Fanon shows how colonial powers didn't just occupy land. They occupied minds, partly by controlling knowledge and especially language.
How did that work?
He uses the example of Martinique, where speaking French, the colonizer's language, was seen as superior, more civilized, while Creole was looked down upon, actively discouraged in schools.
So devaluing the local language automatically devalues the culture, the knowledge, the ways of seeing the world embedded in that language.
Exactly. It forces the colonized to internalize the idea that their own heritage is inferior. Fanon talks about the psychological impact, the desire to be accepted, to become whiter, by mastering the colonizer's language and cultural tools.
That's incredibly powerful. Language itself becomes a gatekeeper, reinforcing the whole structure of domination.
It highlights just how deeply power is embedded in what we know, what we speak, what we value.
Which brings us to this really important point about marginalized epistemologies, these other ways of knowing, outside the dominant Western scientific model.
Yeah, this is key. We often take the Western emphasis on, say, empirical observation, measurable data, logical proof as the gold standard for knowledge. You see a reflection of that focus on verifiable sense experience in someone like A.J. Ayer.
In Language, Truth, and Logic, where he's focused on what can be factually verified.
Right. And while his project was about logic and language, that underlying assumption that knowledge is primarily about externally verifiable facts has been very influential. But it potentially sidelines other valid ways of understanding.
Like what, for example?
Well, think about Charles Taylor again and his idea of authenticity, being true to yourself. How do you discover that truth?
Through introspection, reflection, maybe meditation.
Exactly. Ways of knowing that are more internal, subjective perhaps, but potentially crucial for self-understanding and living a meaningful life. They don't always fit neatly into a lab-based model.
So prioritizing only one kind of knowing might make us miss out on other forms of wisdom or self-discovery.
It could. And Nietzsche, again, offers a complex take with his critique of the ascetic ideal.
The ideal of self-denial, often for spiritual reasons.
Yes. He sees value in the philosopher seeking higher understanding, but he also suggests that sometimes rejecting worldly knowledge or bodily experience can be a kind of power move by those who feel weak in other ways.
How so?
By declaring worldly pursuits and the knowledge associated with them as somehow base or unimportant, they can claim a different kind of superiority, a spiritual superiority. They're too good for this world.
So even rejecting certain knowledge can be tangled up with power dynamics. That's interesting.
It's complicated. And then, of course, we have rich traditions entirely outside the Western lineage. Think of Confucius in the Analects.
Focused on ethics, duty, social harmony.
And learning from the past, cultivating virtue. For Confucius, knowledge isn't just about facts. It's deeply intertwined with moral understanding, self-cultivation, and knowing your place in society. It's a holistic view.
So, across these texts, we're seeing this huge diversity in what knowledge even means, how you get it, and who says what counts, which makes the question of technology today even more complex.
Absolutely. Technology. The great democratizer. Or not.
On the one hand, the internet makes incredible amounts of information available to potentially anyone with a connection.
That potential is undeniable.
Yeah.
Access to libraries, research, different perspectives. It's unprecedented.
Yes, there's always a but.
There's always a but. Access isn't uniform. Not everyone has reliable internet or the devices. Then there's digital literacy, the skills to find, evaluate, and use information effectively.
Yeah, you can drown in information if you don't know how to navigate it.
Exactly. And critically, who controls the platforms? Search engine algorithms, social media feeds, they shape what we see, what gets prioritized. Existing power structures can absolutely be replicated, even amplified online.
It's like having a massive library, but the entrance fee is high for some, the catalog system is biased, and certain wings are restricted or promote specific viewpoints.
That's a good analogy. Plus, Taylor's concern about instrumental reason seems relevant here too. This focus on efficiency, data, technical solutions.
How does that connect?
Well, he worries it can overshadow other forms of knowledge, ethical reflection, cultural understanding, things that aren't easily quantified. It can lead to a more atomized, maybe less engaged society, even with all this information flowing around.
And Mill's worry about the government of mediocrity, does that apply in the digital age?
I think you could argue it does, even with access. If public discourse is dominated by simplified narratives, popular opinions, or even misinformation spread rapidly online.
Does that leave enough space for deep thinking, for challenging or unpopular ideas to really get a hearing?
That's the concern. The sheer volume and speed might work against careful deliberation or the nurturing of truly original thought. Widespread access doesn't automatically equal informed, critical engagement.
So wrapping this up, it seems like the struggle over knowledge, who owns it, who defines it, who gets access is, well, it's ongoing.
Definitely. We've seen how power operates both blatantly through censorship and subtly through social norms or even language itself.
And the value given to different ways of knowing, especially non-Western or non-dominant forms, that's still a live issue.
And technology is this incredibly powerful force, but it's clearly not a simple fix. It holds potential for democratization, but also for reinforcing inequality.
So those questions we started with, they don't really have easy answers, do they? Who should own and distribute knowledge? How is power shaping what we learn right now? Is tech closing the gap or not? Why are some ways of knowing dismissed?
They're questions to keep asking, I think. They push us to be more critical about where our information comes from and how we value different kinds of understanding.
Okay, so here's a final thought for you, our listener, to chew on. Knowing all this, knowing how history and power have shaped what we think of as knowledge, what can we actually do? How can we, as individuals and maybe as societies, try to build a more fair, more inclusive way of learning and knowing, especially now in this digital age?
And maybe ask yourself, what overlooked ways of knowing, perhaps from different cultures or traditions, might hold really valuable insights that we're currently missing?
Something to ponder. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.